Hi, my name is Megan Feiner, and today I'm going to be talking about exceptionalities within education and how they affect intellectual, social, cognitive, and behavioral, as well as academic performances within the classroom, as well as two approaches for you as an academic professional or a teacher to use within your classroom to better help your students achieve their goals. So let's get started. So exceptionality is understood by the Educational and Early Childhood Development Association as patterns of development identified by the strengths and needs of groups of students. There are 14 total currently disabilities categorized under the IDEA. Of course, I'm sure there will be more eventually, or there may be less eventually, but in order to apply for these, you must follow state regulations, and you may fall under an IEP plan or 504 plan. So as a teacher, you're responsible for designing and creating a environment as well as an educational opportunities for all students, but also create an individualized approach for students' needs and strengths and weaknesses. Of course, you're not alone. You may have an IEP team as well as other educators. You may have family, caregivers who can help you implement what you're trying to achieve in your classroom. So there are two main approaches that are considered the highlights for helping students with exceptionalities of helping just other students in the classroom, and this is universal design as well as differentiated instruction. So universal design is more on a broad spectrum. It's a framework developed by the CAST that guides design of learning and experiences to proactively meet the needs of learners, of all learners. So not just specifically one learner, but all learners. Differentiated instruction is more of a specialized, and it's tailoring instruction to meet individuals' needs, and rather than just everyone. And assessment and as well as other advancements are used to help you see what you need to help the student with. So next we're going to talk about some disabilities. So as I said earlier, there are 14 disabilities characterized by the IDEA. Some of these include autism, deaf and blindness, as well as deaf, developmental delays, ADHD, TBI, speech and language disabilities, etc. So let's begin. So autism is a developmental disorder, and it's usually affects students more on a social level. Oftentimes, students with autism are either verbal or nonverbal, but may be verbal in a way that's not understood by everyone. And this usually affects about 1/3 of students that are diagnosed. Academically, they may have trouble with instruction as well as following through with instruction, so it's important to guide them in the right direction. As well as they may also struggle with loud noises and being touched within the classroom. Cognitively, it affects their ability to predict behaviors as well as regulate their own behaviors, which may lead them to be loud within the classroom or act out, which may be distracting to other students as well as themselves. Deaf and blindness, of course, there are 3 categories within this. There's deaf, blind, and deaf and blindness. Hearing loss usually socially affects one's receptive and expressive communication skills, so they may have a hard time receiving the information that's being told to them, and as well as expressing a response to what they're hearing. So that may be hard for them within the classroom to understand what the teacher is saying, as well as ask questions or maybe communicate with others on in a group project. Language deficits are usually one of the common reasons for their poor academic achievements. They may also be accompanied by inattention, poor behavior, and other issues. Oftentimes, this is one of the major misdiagnosed issues within educating exceptional students. Next, we have developmental delays. I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about visuals. Visual impairments affect social, motor, and language and cognitive development. Some specific examples include reduced social interaction, inability to manipulate objects. Oftentimes, students may not want to engage with someone who can't see. Oftentimes, they need accompaniment of someone else, another educator, to help them in the classroom, such as with their braille and other issues. Next, we're going to talk about developmental delay. Developmental delay is when a child is not reaching their developmental milestones. It may be categorized by physical development problems, cognitive development problems, communication development problems, which is such as late talkers. They often have times learning sounds and words and being able to properly articulate their words, as well as social and emotional, as well as adaptive development. Usually, oftentimes, they're temporarily lagging behind other students' development, and they usually catch up around the ages of 3 or 4, but it can extend into later years. Usually, they're delayed in speech and language skills, and they often have difficulty interacting with others. It also interferes with their awareness, causing learning difficulties to arise. Also, difficulty communicating and playing with others. There's other factors, of course, that would lead to other cognitive issues. The next thing I'm going to talk about is ADHD. ADHD is a rather new diagnosis within the field. It's been very up for debate on whether they need IEPs or 5 course, but of course they are considered merit currently. And it's categorized by a persistent pattern of inattention or hyperactivity that interferes with development. Oftentimes it affects more than just in the classroom. It can affect home life as well as just outside of school. And oftentimes the students have a hard time sitting there and focusing, and just inability to control their emotions, their feelings, their arm movements, hand movements. There are ways to get around this. There are some like sitting on a ball during class so they can bounce but still be productive. Also just providing different options for them to stay focused and offering positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement. A few more disabilities we're going to talk about are emotional disturbances, which are characterized by a range of behaviors that affect a child's performance. They usually are not explained by intellectual or other sensory factors. Usually they have an inability to maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships. Oftentimes their moods are changing quite often, which can make it hard for them to want to be in the classroom. Depression is one of the major ones, and as well as they may feel fear in the classroom. Oftentimes this is goes hand in hand with schizophrenia, and often people with schizophrenia are often very fearful of the environment around them, so it may be really hard for them to focus in the classroom. Intellectual disabilities are significant limitations with intellectual functioning, such as reasoning, learning, and problem solving. They may affect adaptive behaviors and covers a range of social and practical skills. So there's limitations with their ability to be socially appropriate as well as their practical skills. Examples of these would be Down syndrome, Prader-Willi, Fragile X syndrome, and these usually are significant intellectual deficits, and usually most times the student will not cognitively catch up with the other students, and they will need an IEP. As far as developmental specific learning disabilities, students usually often have difficulties organizing their thoughts and processes in their classroom and in their environment. They may have difficulty receiving information, such as perceptual information, correctly processing the information, which is due to cognition and thinking, satisfactorily responding to information such as written verbal expressions. Oftentimes, these students have a superior intelligence in one gifted field. Albert Einstein is a great example of this. You as a teacher may see them excel in math, but they may lag in other categories. The strengths and offsets are often noticeable, such as inability to read and write, memory, difficulty understanding. And this usually stems from neurological functioning in the brain deficits in that. Next is speech and language impairments. Children usually have problems with articulation and fluency within their words communication. They may also have a hard time understanding or being understood when talking to others, and oftentimes this can come from aphasia, dysphagia, and other issues that are affected by the brain in that Broca's area. They may also have difficulty following directions, reading, writing, or speaking out loud. They may feel anxious and when they're socially speaking with others. Also, they may miss class time in order to get help from a speech therapist. Traumatic brain injury is the last one I want to talk about, and this is affects a lot of students, whether it be a concussion or a serious brain injury that caused by blunt force trauma. Usually impairs multiple lobes or one lobe. It can also cause environmental issues, ability to build relationships with others, cognitive and perceptual issues, behavioral issues, just depending upon where in the brain that it's affected, can really affect how they interact with others, as well as their ability to learn within the classroom, because oftentimes, even in concussions, for example, they do set back the learning abilities of a student or an adult even. So lastly, I'm going to talk about the application of universal design as well as differentiated approach, which I talked about earlier. So universal design, a few processes I wanted to just go through was that you need to identify what you as an educator want to achieve, as well as your student, and involving them in that, as well as their family in the IEP program, and developing guidelines and standards and applying them, as well as making accommodations for students. There's just a few principles. You want to have flexibility. You want to allow them to understand what they're seeing and understand their instructions. You want it to be simple, and you want it to be an approach that is appropriate for them. So some examples of these would be group work, response cards, station work, having a video, maybe having multiple means of representation of one project in order to reach that student and their needs. Lastly, I'm going to talk about differentiated instruction. So differentiated instruction is, of course, the approach that is more focused on the individual, the student itself, and it's based on their strengths and weaknesses. So the teacher may assess them and find out that they're being strong in one category, and then they need to work on another category, and then they may take another assessment and realize that they need to change the curriculum. So it's constantly changing, but it's focusing on the student's needs. Some examples of using this in the classroom would be station work, checking in with the student, because maybe you have two teachers within the classroom to help them, as well as decorating their portfolios, sitting in a wavy chair to keep their attention on what's going on. Just making sure that they feel comfortable in the classroom and that they are achieving what they need to achieve without being disruptive or unproductive. Throughout this, we talked about some exceptionalities within education and how they affect intellectual, social, and cognitive, as well as academic performances. We also talked about the application of two different types of ways to approach helping a student with a disability. These are very important to understand as a teacher. Also, being able to apply them is really important. because it may make the difference between them achieving and staying where they're at currently. So I hope you learned a lot from this, and I can't thank you enough for watching this.